I think is,
We put in the recording now. Okay, go ahead.
let me talk about what I consider to be the larger context, because that's how I find the significance and meaning in these philosophers. So the larger context, and then when I'm done, after I propose a sort of thesis about what I think the larger context is, then I'll let you evaluate and give me some feedback on it. So the larger context that I see is one that you'll probably be familiar with because I've talked about it before, which is that we begin by understanding that there are two great philosophical traditions in Western civilization. First, there's the rationalistic tradition, and second, there's the empirical tradition. Now, you alluded to this already by talking about Ionian science. Fine. But I want to emphasize the importance of the fact that these two traditions run in parallel, but they each have their own rules.
Mm-hmm.
Rationalist tradition, as it seems to me, is based primarily on pure logic, and it tends to be mathematical. The empirical tradition is based on the aim of finding rational.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm proposing a larger context, and I'm proposing that there are these two traditions that run parallel with each other and each have their own rules. And from my point of view, in the history of ideas, any philosopher that advances either of these traditions is important, just so we can understand Western civilization. However, I have to say that I personally also am particularly attached to the empiricist tradition. And since Anaxagoras is an empiricist, as I view him, I consider him to be meaningful and particularly meaningful in that way. But anyway, these two traditions are both, I believe, based on pure logic. Excuse me, both traditions have a strong amount of rationality, but the rationalist tradition is based primarily on pure logic and tends to be mathematical. The empirical tradition is based on the aim of finding rational explanations for the world based on evidence from the senses. That's what it seems to me to be the difference. Now, what's similar to both of these traditions is that they are both based on what we would call the logic in their methodology. In particular, they're both based on the rule that you can't get something from nothing. That is their logical foundation. And after that beginning premise, one tradition discusses the world which we perceive from our senses and uses arguments based on evidence from the senses to make its points. This is the empirical tradition. The other uses logic to make its points and tends in many cases to depend for its methodology on definitions of words. This is the rationalistic tradition. So Anaxagoras makes his greatest contribution by advancing the empirical tradition, what is today would be called scientific inquiry. So that's the larger context. That's how I view all of these pre-Socratic philosophers, and not only the pre-Socratics, but all philosophers going through all history. Any reaction?
No, actually, I'm not surprised you by knowing you, for many years. I'm not surprised you praise Anaxagoras much, okay, because he probably, in your view, he's the founding father of empiricism tradition. I believe you agree with this.
Well, that's a great comment. And let me just say that I agree with much of it. Anaxagoras is often called the father of philosophy in Athens, because, of course, he went from Ionia and he spent all of his philosophical career in Athens. But he could also be considered one of the most important founders of empiricism. However, I probably would give the earlier Milesian philosophers, particularly Anaximander, but also Thales and Anaximenes, as being the true founders. Anaxagoras simply carries on the tradition. But what I do object to is calling Aristotle the founder of science, because I look at these earlier philosophers as being the real founders. Aristotle takes the ball that he received from these Ionians and ran with it. That's how I view it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. We should not call Aristotle as the founding father of science, because he is more anti-science than Anaxagoras. And I praise Anaxagoras more than other Ionian philosophy, because before him, their job is much easier because they don't have to face permanentities. Okay, so their job is much easier. And Anaxagoras, and the next week we are going to talk about empiricals. They both are more difficult because they are facing the strong elitic school. Okay, so I think they are greater than the rest of philosophers. In another way, Anaxagoras is, I think he got exiled because he is being accused of atheist. Okay, so in a way, he is more scientific than Plato and Aristotle. Okay, let's put this way. And he totally, I don't think he has any philosophy regarding the religion or God, right? He probably is, at least in the reading, I don't see he talking about God. So
Those are all great points, really good points. Yeah.
so we may go to the text.
Okay, let's go to the text.
Okay, let's start.
Anaxagoras held that the universe is infinite in extent and composed of mind and matter, but mind is a special kind of matter. There is no empty space.
Okay, great. I think this one set his materialism tradition. Okay, even the mind is a sort of material, different kind of material.
Do you think that there were other philosophers that believed that mind was non-material?
Well,
Do you think there were other philosophers who believed that
like
God,
Descartes and all the Western tradition, usually we don't see mind.
right?
And then
Right.
at least Plato would not agree. Okay, mind is a kind of material. He insists it's immaterial because if it's a material, it's destructible. So okay, so in this case, I think Anaxagoras set a strong tradition of so-called should I call radical materialism? I don't know.
Yeah, okay, very good. Yeah, I like it. Okay, my comment was that I noticed in the sentence that in the summary of his views that it says that he believes the universe is infinite in extent. Remember, last time we talked, we discussed the fact that for Parmenides, the notion of an infinite universe would be abhorrent. For Anaxagoras, he seems to have no problem with infinite. He talks about material being infinitely small. He talks about the universe being infinitely large. I find that interesting on his part because
Yeah, I think the infinity and the vacuum is two strong concept, right? For the ancient philosopher need to deal. And you, without any rational thought, you just have to take a yes or no question because there's no way to rationalize, they have the infinity, or they have the vacuum or void space, and it just take us a fundamental, given. I think that's,
Okay, that's a great point. Let's go on, okay?
yeah, that's good.
Matter is not composed of primary units. It is infinitely divisible, nor is there a least of what is small, but there is always a smaller, for it cannot be that what exists should cease to be by being cut. If you take a piece of a certain kind of matter, a hair, say, or a steak, and begin cutting, no matter how finely you cut it, the pieces will still have the characteristics of hair or flesh. How can hair come from what is not hair, or flesh from what is not flesh?
So even he's very scientific, but I think he set the difference to the atomist, right? The view of material. Okay.
True. But the motivation, I think, behind this statement of his, I believe, as you mentioned earlier, has to do with the fact that a lot of his agenda has to do with refuting Parmenides. And Parmenides discussed the fact that you can't get something from nothing. And so he's trying to deal with how hair can arise out of nothing. And he agrees with Parmenides that that's impossible. And so therefore he solves it very slickly. He says that it doesn't come out of nothing because the hair goes down to being infinitely small. And so it appears to be an idea which is almost self-contradictory and inconceivable, but you have to give him this. He does solve the dilemma which was posed by Parmenides. And I think that that's how we're to look at
Yeah,
it.
he just take a different assumption, right? By assuming they have infinity, then the infinite division is possible. Okay, then it change everything. I think that's the his way. So if we look at the opponent of Parmenides, right? One we can see is becoming and being. That's becoming is Heraclitus, and the being is Parmenides. But if you look at another view on the infinity of finite, okay, then one is Anaxagoras, and the finite is Parmenides. So I think that's two person, Anaxagoras and Heraclitus, both are opponents to Parmenides. I think that's the way I see it. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
Move on.
Nevertheless, nevertheless,
Nevertheless, yeah.
Nevertheless, we eat bread, and the bread, we say, becomes hair and flesh. This is not accurate. Anaxagoras says, the Greeks follow a wrong usage in speaking of coming into existence and passing away. For nothing comes into existence or passes away, but there is mingling and separation of things that exist. So they would be right to call coming into existence mixture and passing away separation. The coming into existence of hair is really mixture then, and the passing away of the bread is separation. But mixture of what and separation of what? Any crumb of bread, however tiny, has all the properties of the whole loaf. Bread is not made of bits of hair and flesh. Likewise, a hair is not separable into microscopic breadcrumbs. How then can hair be a mixture into which bread enters, while at the same time it cannot come from what is not here.
So I think here is he asked the further question about Heraclitus becoming, right? Heraclitus only talk about becoming, but the mechanism of becoming, he kind of started with coming into existence, okay? Mixture and passing away separation. So this one is one more finally statement of nothing comes into nothing. Okay. How do I explain it? Because the
Well, you
thing,
made a good start. Nothing,
yeah,
you can't get something from nothing.
yeah, you still cannot get something from nothing, but you can get something from mixing. Okay. Something cannot disappear into nothing, but you can passing away, separation. Okay, so they take one more step. Let's put it a bit, get more detailed explanation for the nothing comes from nothing. Okay, so and the nothing disappear into nothing. Okay, so I think that's the one more step of explanation. And McGill posed a question about how, right? And that I think that's the next paragraph. McGill try to explain.
Well, I pretty much agree with what you're saying, and you put it well. However, I do think that this part of Anaxagoras's philosophy is a little confusing.
You think it's
Um,
confused?
I don't find it very persuasive that
Well, I think the you
but
will.
let me just say let me just defend him for a second.
Okay.
Um, First of all, when he talks about mingling, he reminds me of Empedocles's solution, which is that we have different substances, and when they combine in different ways and they mingle together, that's how we get all the variety. So it seems as if he, in some ways, has a solution that's similar to Empedocles. Now, he backs away from Empedocles because he also wants to agree with Parmenides and assert that you can't get something from nothing. So I think that it's slightly unconvincing. But as I thought of something interesting. Maybe you can respond to this. That this notion that separating creates a disappearance, I found very interesting because if you think about modern science, if you take water and you separate the hydrogen and oxygen, then the water disappears. So by separating, you create change, even though you have retained the same stuff. I don't know, because
Well,
otherwise,
in this way, I think that he's pretty good. It's a great idea, right? Basics the same as a mixture, right? You can mix. Well, at that time, they don't have the concept to separate the physical reaction as a mixture or chemical reaction, right? But they have no way to.
well,
But
why
you
not?
can.
Why
Well,
not?
at that time, they have
Look,
no
the
way
question
to.
is, he says, when you separate things, it disappears. How are we to imagine that?
Well,
But
I think he has a great idea talking about this. And same as mixture, right? You can mix oxygen and hydrogen into a water, right? I think that's the way he's talking about. But
yeah,
the question is how? Okay. And the McGill question, okay, I think that's in the next paragraph talk about is he probably didn't explain. But I believe the explanation is in Empedocles. Okay, Empedocles is talking about love and the strife. That's the external force to make the mixture, okay, or separation. I think that's another thing we can look at. But the weakness of Anaxagoras is he didn't explain how, okay, what make the thing mix together. And
Really? You find fault with that?
pardon me?
You found fault with that?
Well, he didn't explain, right? Did he explain? I
Well,
think we
no, he doesn't, but
yeah, but he
that's not
didn't explain the
that's not,
force, okay, the
well,
mechanism.
the reason, the how is simply the original force, which was created by mind, which set into motion the entire universe.
Ah, okay. I think you're probably right.
So his
He
theory
thinks that
of
the
dynamism is
nous
all
is
based
the
on this
one.
efficient cause.
Yeah, he probably thinks that the nous is the efficient cause to do this. Yeah, yeah. I
Right.
think you're right.
I
Yeah.
don't find a problem with that, but what I found problems with was that he didn't explain very well how it is that, first of all, you can't get something from nothing, but second of all, when you separate things, it disappears. Now we could say that it's the only way I could think of it is in modern terms of how substances disappear when you separate them, but you retain the same material.
I
But
think that he doesn't say disappear into nothing. I think
he doesn't say
I think
disappear into nothing. No,
does he say so?
he does
No?
say disappear.
Yeah,
He certainly doesn't
disappear.
say into nothing.
Okay, let's say if you decompose, okay, a water into hydrogen and oxygen, do you call it a disappear or not? And I think in a way you
No,
call it
you don't say that. But you
well,
can say that the water is all disappeared because it does seem to disappear.
I think okay, so probably we read this sentence different. I read this one what do I say?
And remember, he talks about it. He says when you separate, then it disappears.
Well, I think they
When you
disappear mean this.
mingle, something else appears.
Well, I don't think he's talking about disappear into nothing.
No,
I
I
think
know that. I know that.
but it disappeared to different material. That's why he believed they have the seeds of many things. So it disappears. So that means let's say the human flesh disappears, okay, to something else, okay, not disappear into nothing. So to me,
Yeah, that's
logically,
right. I agree.
that's not the problem, okay, unless I don't think he talking about disappear into nothing, okay,
I know that.
okay.
Okay, let's continue. Um,
The
the
answer.
answer is that the things that are in the one world are not divided nor cut off from one another with a hatchet. While bread contains no particles of hair, it nevertheless contains hair, so to speak, fused or dissolved in it. And in general, all things will be in everything, nor is it possible for them to be apart. But all things have a portion of everything, and in all things, many things are contained, and an equal number, both in the greater and in the smaller of the things that are separated.
So are you fine with this explanation? I think the logically may have some problem, but you know, for the ancient people, I don't expect too much. That's my opinion.
Well, there's really two parts to this hypothesis. The first of all is that by mingling and separating, that substances predominate or seem to appear or disappear. Here he seems to be approaching Empedocles from my point of view, because he's talking about mingling leading to the changes that are necessary. But then the second part of his thesis has to do with there's everything in everything, so that instead of simply having a single substance, then every single piece of substance contains everything. And that is mind-baffling and it seems to be contradictory, but you have to admit it does answer Parmenides.
Yeah,
Because if
I agree with
everything
you.
is in everything, then that means that nothing is created and nothing is destroyed into nothingness.
Yeah, but they have, I think you also see the contradiction here, right? If you have the hair, you can keep cutting, keep wood, that's a piece of wood. You keep cutting infinitely, okay, cut the wood. You still have the small, 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 infinitely small size of wood there. It's still material of wood.
Yeah.
But if you set the wood to decompose into non-wood, okay, how is
Yeah.
he going to explain that? Where is the non-wood going to separation? So that's the two situation happen, right? If you keep cutting, you can be infinitely small of piece of wood or particle of wood. But if you let the wood set to decompose, then the wood would totally disappear. Okay, that's the part he cannot explain. But it's no this
Well,
situation
I'm not
when
sure it does disappear. I think that as you cut it to a certain extent, then the woodiness tends not to predominate as much as it did before, and it's a question of predominance.
I think in Anaxagoras' point of view, if you cut the piece of wood, right, doesn't matter how many times you cut, you still have the piece of wood, okay, so-called woodness still there, okay. I think that's it, and that's why he's totally different from uh, an atomist, right? Because according to atomists, to certain particle, molecule of wood, okay, you cannot cut anymore. If you cut further, then it becomes non-wood. But in an Anaxagoras point of view, you can infinitely keep cutting the wood, but he has to explain how wood disappear into non-wood, because this two part is conflicts in my point of view.
Okay. I want to bring up also something that I've talked to you in earlier discussions, which is that one way to conceptualize having everything be in everything, that again, I know this is an anachronism, but I like looking at modern science and the discovery that every cell in every organism is replicated throughout the entire organism. So you can take a tiny cell from a finger and it will have, and using cloning, you can multiply it so that it becomes an entirely new organism. So the notion that everything is in everything has a modern parallel, I think.
Yeah, yeah, but you need atomism to sustain this argument. Okay.
Yeah, but you have to, if you look at the argument rather than physically, but more imaginatively, and you try to understand how everything can be in everything, you get a kind of a metaphor when you think
Yeah,
about the trillions of cells that are in a human body, each one containing everything. And notice
yeah.
that in a cell, the way we would normally look at the cell, we know
This
that
part has no problem. I have no problem with
the
it.
cell um, doesn't contain the same material substance as the rest of the body, um, but it contains the potential for an entirely new body, which
Okay. Yeah.
potential is going to be, I don't think it's emphasized in McGill enough as much as I found in other secondary
I don't
sources.
think Anaxagoras mentioned about a potentiality. That I
Who
think this
did?
concept,
Who?
Anaxagoras.
Does he talk about potential?
I don't think so. I think this
Well, the
concept
secondary
was
sources point out that his potentiality was a forerunner of the potentiality
really,
used later by Aristotle.
really.
Even if he
So,
didn't mention the word, there's a sense that there's a potentiality um, in the substances.
okay, no,
Now, I hear your response, you didn't see it and you're not quite willing to accept that, but I can just tell you that it is in some secondary sources.
Okay, so I
Okay.
didn't see that,
So
and
you
I
just keep it in mind as a
okay. So we
possibility
will leave this one later.
because if this is an early form of potentiality, then it makes his influence on Aristotle even all the more striking. I'm very interested in the way that Anaxagoras influenced Aristotle in many ways. And the notion of potentiality might be one of them, which would be
Okay.
significant. Okay. A loaf of bread contains portions of everything. That is, it contains, or rather is, a complex of all the sensible qualities there are. And the same is true of every crumb of the loaf. Anaxagoras was notorious for asserting that snow is black in the sense that even the purest white stuff yet contains a portion of everything, including blackness. Yet the loaf does not appear to our senses as a primordial chaos. Each single thing is most manifestly those things of which it has most in it. It presents us with a definite restricted set of qualities, let us say brownness, moisture, bread smell, and the bread taste. Hair, as we know, it is black, shiny, oily. Hair is in bread in the sense that blackness, shininess, and oilness are all there, but relatively in such small quantities that the weakness of our senses prevent our discerning the truth. If we were presented, per impossible, with a loaf of pure bread, we could not distinguish it from an ordinary loaf by looking at it, smelling it, or tasting it, but it would not nourish us. Our insights, however, are able, in an unexplained manner, to separate out the traces of hair and flesh.
I think here you can see, that's he when he talk about bread, right? He doesn't has the concept of so-called breadness or the substance of the bread. In his definition of bread, it has bread taste, bread color, bread nutrition. Okay, so obvious for the ancient Greek, they don't separate the quality and the property and the material itself, right? So that we understand that, but you can see what he focus is the attribute, not the substance. I think
that's fair, but
so in another way, his seed of bread or hair, okay, is not the we call the hairness or breadness. The seed is the attribute, the mixture of all the attribute. For example, the hair, blackness, whatever, okay, greasy, oily, okay, all these attribute, okay, mixed together become like wood, right? Will be the hardness, brownness, okay, I don't know, okay, whatever, okay, okay, mixed together, not the woodness.
okay, I see your point, and I think you're probably right. But I just want to imagine for a moment that he is talking about substances, even though you're probably right that he's probably talking about attributes. Now, what I find interesting, considering that bread seems to change into another substance, I find that that's a perceptive observation on Anaxagoras's part, that realizing that there is kind of a problem and a mystery involved because we eat, and if you are a study of nature, you will realize that what we eat turns into something else. I find that fascinating to talk about that aspect of nature. And it's a real mystery as to how that happens. Now, in modern times and modern biochemistry, we figured out that bread is composed of the same kinds of constituent elements, carbohydrates and proteins and amino acids, which rearranged become the new substance.
Yeah.
So the stuff does retain its reality. It's only the rearrangement, it's the material way it's rearranged, we could say the different type of mixture that changes its appearance.
Yeah,
So
if you talk about the mixture, right, that's one thing you need to accept is atom, okay? But the problem of Anaxagoras is, so to me, the problem of Anaxagoras is he doesn't accept atom, but he talk about the mixture and the separation. That's kind of the problem, okay?
well, let's,
Because you need to accept atom, okay? Otherwise, you talk about mixture and then you can see the logical conflicts.
no, I'm not as critical as you are, and I'm not as severe, because I still think that it's a leap of imagination to realize that a different kind of mixture,
I,
when you
I,
look at amino acids and the way that they
yeah,
mix,
one way we can look at is not use amino acid, okay? If you take the attribute, okay, as the fundamental. So instead of amino acid, okay, amino acid, we in our modern imagination, it's some molecule, okay. So that which is indivisible. But if you think about instead of amino, you talk about uh, the taste of meat, okay, meat flavorness, okay,
yeah,
which is divisible, okay, you can infinitely divide, okay, this one. So in this case, if you ignore the existence of substance, okay, instead of you use the attribute instead of substance, in this case, you don't need atom to support his theory, okay. I hope I
I see your
explained
point.
clear on that, so even
Okay,
it's wrong for today's science, but it probably worked for him.
okay, moving on. Uh,
Uh, just 1 minute. Let me pause for a few seconds. I need to.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Just 1 minute. Okay, let's start.
okay, Anaxagoras used the word seeds, seeds of all things, having all sorts of characteristics, both of color and of savor. A multitude of innumerable seeds, in no way like each other, to indicate the diversity of quality things to be found in even the smallest bit of matter. But the word has no atomistic implications. Anything, however large or small, that has a trace of hair in it is a hair seed. The word occurs only twice in the extant fragments, both times in a description of world formation, and all that is signified is that the original mixture of all things has the potentialities in it for eventual separation into the most diverse kinds of objects. So there's that concept of potentiality.
Well, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I got you. Yeah, okay. Okay, let me see. All that is signified is that the original mixture of all things has the potentialities in it for eventual separation into the most diverse kind of. So he probably that's a question. Okay. Is that possible he's talking about when something disappear? Uh he probably not talking about in our modern sense of decompose. He talking about to disappear into something too small to sense. Is that possible he talk about this way? Let's say if the piece of wood in our modern sense, okay, or water, okay, evaporate, right? So there's no more water, okay. And in his point of view
Well,
is
is that
still
a fair line of argumentation to say that something can get smaller, and therefore it's not really turning into nothing?
not really turning to nothing, but it's kind of infinitesimal, right? Like something too small to be sensed. So that's his
So in
concept.
other words, let's say you have a drop of water and
Yeah.
it splits into a million pieces. Then each piece is so small that you can't see it anymore.
You cannot sense. There's no way to sense it, but it's still water. So, for example, in today, human body
Okay,
decompose.
I'll accept that.
Yeah, probably he's talking about in this way logically makes sense, right? Because everything has everything in there. So piece of bread, they include flesh on that. So when I eat the bread, I will grow my meat. Okay, I will become stronger, right? So the bread, the so-called bread seed still there, but they have the seed of
Oh, okay. Yeah.
okay. So
That's very interesting. I
so
like
probably
that.
talking yeah, and then
I that actually is convincing. Yeah. So
so my body
the substance never changes.
yeah, it
The only
never
thing that
changes.
changes is the separation.
Yes, so my body, right? I eat the bread. I also have to go to toilet to poo. So something non-meat of non-fresh part of bread being get out. I don't. It still
Oh,
have
okay. All right. Yeah.
some kind of, but probably that's he's talking about. So when my body, when I die, my body decompose. It still have something Jasonness there, just too small. You cannot see it. Something like.
Well, of course. That goes without saying. Well, so what we're looking at is a kind of metaphysics which is based on quality rather than substance.
Mhm.
And so that we have a metaphysics which is difficult for moderns to accept because we're so used to substances. But when you compare it to other metaphysical systems like Leibniz, who argues that the world is made of non-material spirit and that don't have dimension, then I think it's possible that the world could be made of little tiny infinitesimal bits of qualities. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably
Yeah, so he has
Anaxagoras
an
you're
alternative
talking about.
metaphysics for us.
Yeah, so and that's no surprise. He will next subject he will talk about mind, which is nous, right? So and to him, nous is also a, a small thing, small material. Okay, so just so I think that's what it's also a
Yeah,
reason.
well, fine. Well, we
Yeah,
could talk about that when we get to that. But
yeah.
I want to mention something about seeds. That seeds is a very interesting word that he chooses for his uh, building blocks upon which all qualities are based. And there's a couple of things I want to talk about it. First of all, the word seeds is different from Democritus because Democritus used the word atoms, which means can't be cut. Seeds, just as McGill suggests, seems to indicate potentiality.
Okay.
And one of the things that's interesting is later when we run into the philosopher Lucretius, and Lucretius is drawing directly from Democritus's notion of atoms. All of his metaphysics is not based on this earlier, but Lucretius uses the word seeds also. So I think seeds is an interesting word. It emphasizes a different property of the ultimate constituents of the world. Instead of can't be divided any further, it emphasizes the fact that it's the foundational building block upon which everything else flourishes. So it's interesting the way through history, different philosophers are going to, some of them are going to use the word atoms and some are going to use the word seeds.
Yeah, seeds is yeah, I think we have to make sure seeds is a totally different concept from Democritus atom, right? So
Well, how then can we excuse Lucretius, whose entire philosophy is materialistic, comes directly from Democritus? How can we excuse his use of seeds instead of atoms?
so you mean seeds and atom are the same way?
According to Lucretius, I think that they are basically the same thing, only emphasizing different properties.
Well, seeds is dividable,
Seeds emphasizes the potentiality
but
because
let me
the
ask you the
ultimate
question.
building blocks are what form all the variety in the world. So if
So
you
it,
want to emphasize that aspect of the ultimate constituents, then you call them seeds. If you want
so
to
can
emphasize
you
can't be cut, then you call them atoms.
does the seeds can be cut?
Not according to Lucretius.
Yeah, but according to
And
Anaxagoras,
Lucretius calls them cut, it calls them seeds.
the Christians call it seed.
Yes. I always
So
found that
the
fascinating. We're going to run into it when we read on the nature of things.
so hold on. That's a big thing. The Christians said the
He never
seed
uses the word atoms. He used the word seeds.
really.
Yeah.
So the Christians and does the Christians see the seeds can be cut in health?
No, he takes all of his metaphysics from Epicurus, who drew everything from Democritus. So no, you can't cut them. But he's just emphasizing a different property. That's all. The potentiality of these things.
I'm a little bit confused. According to Anaxagoras, right? Everything contains the seed. So a
Yeah.
piece of wood, okay, they have the seeds of wood.
Yes.
Oh, I know. Okay. So you talk about seeds is potential to become
Potential.
wood.
Exactly.
Okay, it's not a physical seed. It's a
No, no, of course not.
okay.
It's
I
a
think that's
metaphor.
true. Okay. So seeds is not a material. It's a metaphor. It's a potentiality.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I think that's a that's a big misunderstood. I read the whole thing. Okay, so I need to know. So seeds is not a physical seed, like it's a potential, just the seed of acorn. Okay, it's
Nothing
so
like the
small.
seed of an acorn, no.
No. I'm talking about when we talk about seeds of acorn, we can either talk about the small piece of acorn, but we can also talk about metaphysically. Okay, it has a potentiality to
Exactly.
become a huge tree, right? So,
Right.
okay, so Anaxagoras talk about seeds is about the potentiality. Do you agree on that? Yeah.
I
Okay. So
agree.
that's why we disagree at the beginning. I don't see potentiality in his philosophy. But if you take seeds metaphysically, then it's a potentiality. Yeah. Okay. Great. That's great to know. Let's move on to the next subject, which is
Okay, mind, like blackness or the smell of bread, is a real stuff. Consequently, it has location. It is certainly there where everything else is and occupies space. It is the thinnest of all things and the purest. Sufficient evidence to our way of thinking to make it a kind of matter. But it must be remembered that Anaxagoras does not make a distinction between stuff and the qualities of stuff. Indeed, refusal to make this distinction is the key to his philosophy. Mind has or is the properties that in our experience we find it to have. It is conscious and cognitive. It has all the knowledge about everything and powerful, that is, manifests itself as willpower or élan vital in living things. Mind has the greatest strength and it has power over all things, both greater and smaller, that have life. It is unique in not entering into mixtures. All other things partake in a portion of everything, while mind is infinite and self-ruled and is mixed with nothing but is alone itself by itself. Anaxagoras argued that if it were not by itself, but were mixed with anything else, it would partake in all things if it were mixed with any. For in everything there is a portion of everything, and the things mixed with it would hinder it, so that it would have power over nothing in the same way that it has now, being alone by itself. The thought seems to be that if mind mixed, it would lose its peculiar power, just as blackness in snow or the redness in hair does. But this is impossible, both because what is essentially active cannot become passive, and because our minds are experienced as unities. Also, it would partake in all things if it were mixed with any. Rocks and clods would be alive, an absurdity. So the point is this: everything is everything. So the seeds of the entire world contain everything in it. So snow contains blackness and bread contains hair. But he excludes one part of reality from this general rule, and that is mind.
yeah.
He says that you can't have mind in ever. He says I think he believes that if you put mind in something and it mixes with something, it will be in everything. And that would mean it would be in rocks, which is absurd.
Yeah, then the rock will have consciousness.
Then
So
rocks would have mind,
yeah, then that's the
and
problem.
that's absurd.
So he still cannot ignore the concept of soul. Okay, I believe that's general belief. Okay, so uh, that's why he talk about nous. Okay, mind. It's a material thing, it's conscious, it's cognitive, it's powerful because it has elan volatile and not enter into mixture. It's infinity small, it's self-rule. I think that's all the attribute because he focused on attribute, right? So there's no such thing as mindedness. That's the attribute, combination of this attribute of the mind. And I think you mentioned before about the mechanism of motion. I think that he believed the mind, the nous make the motion. Right?
Okay, very good.
Important for material. Yeah, I think that's a not surprised. That's also realize it's interesting for the if you look at take a bigger picture, right? For the materialism, for materialists, okay, they have to find a way to explain mind because we all agree we have a mind. Then if everything is a material, how does our mind work? I think that's a challenge they have to. Same as idealist, right? Because if everything is ideal, then they have to explain what the existence of the external world, the outside world, because we all know this cup exists. We all know this pencil exists. So how does they also have to explain this one? So I think I find out
Well,
that
I'm not sure I understand why it's difficult to explain mind. Mind is just another quality like
I'm
everything
talking
else.
about for the materialist, okay? They have to explain mind because that's the challenge they have to explain,
Well,
right?
what's difficult for a materialist to explain mind? You could just say
That's just
mind
like
is another piece of matter which
yeah,
has this
then
property.
that's why Anaxagoras had to make mind as a spatial thing because it doesn't come into mixture or separation. Okay, because you cannot mix with other things. If you mix with other things, then this cup will have mind. Then that's problematic. So I think that's they have to make it spatial. Same as something for the pure idealist. They have to explain how does the outside world exist, right? Either bring the God or say everything is
Well, the
just
outside world is just part of the mind.
yes. So that's why they have to explain. Okay. So I find out that's interesting because you all they all face different kind of problems. For the materialism, they never talk about existence of outside world because that's there. Okay.
Well, I would agree with you that this is a knotty, thorny problem for philosophers, and it seems like Anaxagoras is dealing with it, so that makes it all interesting.
Yeah, and
He's like a
then
forerunner of the many philosophers who deal with this. We see it a lot in Plato, for example.
yeah.
Yeah, so I agree.
So yeah, so but and then you can go to theorism. But theorism, you face another problem. How does the outside world connect with your mind, right? So he has to bring God in. Then you bring another question. How do you know God exists? So they have all kind of solution you need to, all kind of problem to resolve, you know.
Right. Okay. But while mind is not mixed with anything, it is present in some living things. In everything, there is a portion of everything except mind, and there are some things in which there is mind also. The power of mind is to initiate activity, motion in these things, and also to move and set in order all things from outside.
I think here uh so the animal has mind, okay? So that's why they can move. And then universe, okay, has mind. That's why setting in order. Okay, so I think that's he. And the Timaeus, okay, or Neoplatonism start to use this idea nous, the universal nous, as the way, you know, I think that's another important part of Anaxagoras.
I agree, but it's important to differentiate between the later thinkers and how they dealt with nous and how Anaxagoras dealt with nous. Anaxagoras dealt with nous primarily as a way of explaining how there can be motion in the universe.
Yeah,
Because without the explanation of the mind, he couldn't figure it out. And
yeah.
to be fair, even modern physicists have a hard time explaining where motion all came from. Apparently, a singularity began expanding for some reason that people can't even figure out billions of years ago. But I think that he has a pretty good common sense view of how motion can occur because he can observe it every time he moves his hand. If you take your hand and lift it up and move it around, what is causing that motion? Mind. So it seems to be a reasonable source of motion, which is different than the kinds of most motion, which is efficient cause. So if you look at the world and you look at where motion came from, most of it comes from efficient causes, things bumping into each other. But there's one kind of motion that occurs, which is not caused by anything bumping into each other, but it's simply caused by the voluntary act of the mind. So he was onto something there in realizing that there's something unique about the mind, which might explain how motion got started when everything was completely still and motionless at the beginning. So how did it all get started? It couldn't have been started by things bumping into each other. It must have been caused by mind. I thought that was a reasonable notion. And I just want to bring up something interesting that you might not know about, which is that Thales is the first scientist in recorded history to do extensive experiments with magnets. And he talks about magnets, and he actually named the magnets because they came from magnesia. And he noticed that there was something very peculiar about magnets because they seem to be able to cause other things to move from a distance. And he postulated that there was something like mind inside magnets, which is very interesting because he came up with similar idea as an Anaxagoras in believing that, realizing that this kind of force is something unique and distinctive. And so I think it's interesting the way the Milesians and the early scientists were able to separate mind as a type of unique force which could be used in their cosmology.
That's interesting to know.
Yeah.
Okay, move on.
Okay. Like all mind is alike, both the greater and smaller. It is the same mind stuff that is present in us as in animals and vegetables. Our greater intelligence is due not to possession of a superior grade of mind, but to our having hands.
Okay, that's good. That's his.
I find that absolutely brilliant and revolutionary. Here he is defining human essence not according to our big brains and our ability to use rationality, but to our hands. And it's interesting to me that physical anthropologists, when they first looked at the transition between apes and humans, they assumed that the forerunners of humans were going to have bigger brains. They didn't.
No, it didn't.
They had very small brains, but they started using tools because of their opposable thumb, and eventually their brains grew and they developed rationality. I think there's a good argument.
Well, but yeah,
I think there's a good argument that humans are distinguished from other creatures by our tool using ability. And I love the philosophers like Freud and Marx who emphasize tool using as what's most essential about people, not our rationality. Go ahead.
I agree with you in the modern sense, and let's put this way. the advantage or the advancement of human being is its hand. As a forerunner, is that we have the hand first, then mind. But before we have hand, is bipedal. Okay, bipedal free up our hand so we can use hand, and then since we use hand, we can get the things more nutritious because we start to cook or do some things. So we have the opportunity to support a big brain. So brain come later. Okay. So bipedal, hand, and foot, then brain, because big brain consume a lot of energy. And if you eat the raw material, there's no way because you have to, just like most of the animal, you have to do all day eating. Okay. Otherwise, you cannot support your big brain. I think that's the the situation. Yeah. So and then the story is in order to support the bigger brain, then you have to baby born immature. Okay. So otherwise the big head cannot come out from the ladies. So I think that's the whole story. But
Okay,
again,
very good.
back to Anaxagoras. I think that he talked this one is not by his theory, it's by accident. Okay, in this way, I think it's not.
Why do you think that? He
Well, because
explicitly says that it's not the brain and rationality that separates people from other creatures, it's our hands. I think I just that's it's so
I think
bold.
that he just say so
By
without.
accident. How could you say by accident?
Well, I think he just say so without a strong foundation to argue that. Unlike
He gets it. I think he had
you get it,
insight.
just like we can say the seeds is the concept of DNA, but he just got it. Okay, he
All right.
gets right.
Okay.
He gets right. So let's put it this way.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Um,
Uh,
like every other Greek philosopher, Anaxagoras held that nothing can come from nothing, nor can anything utterly vanish. The totality of world stuff is fixed. It is all, and we must know that all of them are neither more nor less, for it is not possible for them to be more than all, and all are always equal. But the world of moving, changing, differentiated things that we know is not eternal. Anaxagoras postulated a primeval condition of homogeneity and motionlessness. All things were together, infinite both in number and in smallness, for the small too was infinite. And when all things were together, none of them were plain because of their smallness. But before they were separated off, when all things were together, not even was any color plain, for the mixture of all things prevented it, of the moist and the dry, and the warm and the cold, and the light and the dark, and of much earth that was in it, and of a multitude of innumerable seeds in no way like each other. It is perhaps permissible to think of this initial condition as a gray, dim, damp, tepid, dirty vastness, or if you prefer, a luminosity. Air and fire prevailed over all things, being both of them infinite. For amongst all things, these are the greatest, both in quantity and in size. That is, a homogeneous mixture of all things would look like air and fire, because those are what there is most of.
let me see. Okay, so here I think he start to talk about two subjects. One is talk about the conservation law. Okay, so the law of conservation. Okay, so which is same as Parmenides, but with different. Yes, here to respond to Parmenides because the law of conservation. Okay. Second part is he talking about the uh, cosmogony, right? How does the universe start? I think that's the next one. Okay, but at least he start to talk about at the beginning what's going on. It's a homogeneous. Is he talk about in this paragraph?
He's talking about homogeneous, yeah.
Yeah, homogeneous mixture, right? He talk about homogeneous
Yeah.
mixture of all things, and the word like air and the fire, because those are what there is most of it. Yeah. So he talk about primordial situation. So that's I think you disagree last time when we talk about the beginning. Last week we talk about Parmenides, right? Uh, we talk about Parmenides last week.
Yes, we talked about Parmenides last week.
Yeah, and we also talk
I
about
argued that it was perfectly natural for him to
yeah, but
postulate a
I
perfect
think
sphere.
you disagree on the some culture like the Chinese will believe the primordial, the original state is chaos. Okay, so I think I do see that's a different starting point. Okay, it, homogeneous. That's how uh Anaxagoras is talking about the beginning, okay, of universe. But in Chinese, it all start with chaos, okay, big chaos and ambiguity, okay. So I think that's
Well,
the
that wasn't what we disagreed on.
well, we
What I
disagree
disagreed
because
on
you
was not the
disagree on
different, look,
you disagree on how does chaos coming from, okay.
right. What is the
But same
origin
as
of
how does the
chaos?
homogeneous coming from? That's the question. Same question I can
Well, that's
ask.
the same question, yeah.
Yeah. So
Where does
but
substance come from?
yeah. So we have to start from something. So
No, we can start with nothing, like the
well,
Christians do.
yeah, that's the stuff from Christian. Okay, but you need to have a God. Okay, but without the God, how
God
can
doesn't follow the same laws, so
okay, so you bring something outside the law. So that's the same question. We go to the circle. You either bring a God which is unexplainable, or you can start from homogeneous universe, or you can from the uh, chaos, right? Primal chaos. That's the
yeah.
we talk about. Or you want to put the Tao, okay, if you go to Taoism, let's have the Tao. Then same thing as Tao. Where is Tao coming from? And then go back to the same question. Where is God coming from?
What about the modern view that we start with the singularity?
Yeah, that's another view. But and then that we generally the all science accept this concept. But the situation is what's before. Right.
Okay, well, let me continue.
Okay.
At some point in this mass, mind started a whirl, and mind had power over the whole revolution, so that it began to revolve in the beginning. And it began to revolve first from a small beginning, but the revolution now extends over larger space and will extend over a larger still. We see the whirl of the heavenly bodies still going on overhead.
We probably, I think probably we should continue on, right? Because it's unless
Okay,
it's
sure.
yeah, yeah.
The centrifugal force of the whirl caused separation out of the homogeneous mass as these things revolve and are separated off by the force and speed, and the speed makes the force. Their speed is not like the speed of any of the things that are now among men, but in every way many times as fast. And when mind began to move things, separating off took place from all that was moved, and so much as mind set in motion was all separated. And as things were set in motion and separated, the revolution caused them to be separated much more.
So he talked about the homogeneous as a beginning, then they have the cosmic mind, right? So
Mhm.
so then you have world centrifugal force, then that causes separation, differentiation, then everything in order. I think that's his explanation, which Plato's Timaeus is same thing, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, Timaeus is talking about this, right?
The
The
centrifugal
astrologist.
force
Yeah,
in
the
whirling?
talking about they have the universal mind, then they have the how does everything come into order, right? That's the Timaeus, right? Talking about this.
Well, the philosopher I was thinking of, rather than Plato, was Aristotle, because Aristotle is famous for talking about the circular motion of the spheres around us,
But
that
he
all
talk,
is set in motion by mind.
what does Plato talk about? He talk about Plato talking about the when they are
Plato talks
moving, he
about
talk about the first mover. Okay, he talk about first
Plato
cause.
talks about um, Plato talks about the demiurge.
I think
Aristotle is the one who
Aristotle talk
talks
about
about the first mover.
does it, I think Aristotle talk about demiurge.
No, that's Plato. Plato talks about the demiurge. Aristotle talks about the first mover. Everything you just said perfectly summarizes Aristotle's metaphysics.
I don't see what's the difference of
The difference is
first
that
first mover and
Plato
demiurge.
is more interested in the origin of the forms, where the forms came from. And he says that they came from, that they exist eternally, and that the demiurge then took those forms and caused them to participate in the world. Aristotle's, is so scientific in so many ways. And then it's shocking to read the way he explains everything, all motion. He says it all is caused by a first mover, by the mind that gets everything to move. Before I read Anaxagoras, it always mystified me why he would go out and say that. Now I see that he just read Anaxagoras, tried to figure out where does all motion come from, and almost took it exactly from Anaxagoras.
Well, uh, I I'm not sure.
Okay,
I think
all
we're
right, fine.
we're I the,
We'll eventually find out when we run into
okay. I think
when
you
we
are
read more.
right. The demiurge is when Plato in Timaeus talk about demiurge, and
Yeah,
I think Aristotle also talk about demiurge when he
nope.
talk about no. So how can we differentiate first mover and demiurge?
Every way possible. Plato doesn't even talk about the motion. He just talks about how forms came into existence. It was a demiurge who was like a craftsman taking the forms that were originally in the
You
universe.
talk about Plato.
That's Plato. Aristotle is the one that his system sounds almost exactly like Anaxagoras's, where you get
Okay,
these whirling spheres caused by the first mover, which is a giant mind.
okay, I got you. But
Now,
let
let
me
me just say that
let me ask you
that's
the
it. Wait,
thing.
let me just add that Aristotle adds something very significant, and that is he's quite enthusiastic about adopting the term nous for the original mind.
Yeah.
But he adds something extremely important, which is the notion that the nous not only causes the first motion, but that it also creates purpose in all the forms. So he brings teleology into his system and purpose, and regards that as being created by the nous also. So the thing about Anaxagoras that's so fascinating is that he has this notion of mind, but essentially he's just a complete materialist who never talks about purpose. He simply talks about motion. Whereas Aristotle was very annoyed, and says so, that Anaxagoras didn't do more with the nous, because Aristotle is going to use that as an explanation, not only for the original motion, but also for the essential nature and final cause of all the forms. His way of argument is simply that the human mind is able to do that. And so this giant nous, which is a cosmic nous, does it also.
Okay, so for the Neoplatonism, I think we should discuss this one later because
Neoplatonism,
we probably
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because we have enough.
I see what your argument is.
Yeah.
You might be saying, well, Neoplatonists were Platonists.
Yeah,
So
and
therefore,
which is the same as this
why
idea,
didn't, yeah.
right? You got my
And the
point.
Neoplatonists definitely believed in the nous. They had it,
Yeah, and which is the same as it would well, but that's put this way. I
which
think
I'm arguing was originated
one
by
is
Aristotle.
in the Plotinus, okay, he doesn't know Aristotle, right? During that period of time, the Neoplatonism, they never know who is Aristotle. Well, they know Aristotle, but they probably didn't read Aristotle. Am I right?
That may be beside the point if other people had read Aristotle and he was dealing with the tradition which has Aristotelian elements.
Yeah, because during that time, Aristotle is haven't been discovered. His writing. That's on the 3rd century, which Aristotle is nothing. Okay, so
okay.
All right. Let's move on.
So that'll be something to keep in mind when we go to those philosophers.
Yeah.
Okay, at some point in this mass, mind.
No, I think the separation.
The centrifugal force.
No, we read this one.
The separation resulted not just in differentiation, but in natural order. And all the things that are mingled together and separated off and distinguished are all known by mind. And mind set in order all things that were to be. And that now exists, and this revolution caused the separating off. And the thin is separated from the thick, the warm from the cold, the light from the dark, and the dry from the moist. The thick and the moist and the cold and the dark came together where the earth is now, while the thin and the warm and the dry and the bright went out toward the farther part of the sky. However, it is not clear how. From the earth, stones are solidified by the cold, and these rush outward more than water. They are the sun, moon, and stars, the sun and stars being heated to incandescence by their motion, while the moon, lower down and not moving so fast, shines by the reflected light of the sun.
I'm surprised, in these ancient people, they all know moon, the light of moon is from reflection of sun.
Well, that was an original idea. That was
how do they know it? That's my big question. Yeah.
Well, first of all, the question is, why would they think that the moon was made out of stone?
They can see it because when you see it, you will see some crave. That's not a surprise. Okay. Probably they see that's kind of like Earth, but Earth have no light. Then they must borrow light from somewhere. So probably that's the logic behind, because I don't see Chinese try to talk about the light, where's the moonlight coming from? Okay, so probably just assume it's shining by itself. I don't know. Okay. But I'm surprised they all think that's borrowed from sun. So
well, these notions that the moon reflected the light of the sun were very controversial. One of the things that's interesting to me, especially as we go through this long scientific explanation he has, that sometimes the correct ideas weren't accepted by anyone else. So Anaxagoras is given a lot of credit as being a very perceptive and advanced scientist. His views weren't generally accepted by others. And that's
You mean
true of many of
were
these
not
scientists.
accepted by others? You talk about.
Were not accepted.
Yeah,
by others.
I
So they
agree.
had these different ideas, and some of, they weren't able to prove anything, and so that there were just different ideas coming out. But I have, every time I read from secondary sources about the ideas of Anaxagoras, they always give him credit for some of the bold speculations that he produced, which we agree with in modern times.
Yeah, and I think in this back to this paragraph, when we read it, we read the which part do we read?
We're
read
reading a paragraph that says the separation resulted at the end of page 24.
24, not 25.
Very end of 24.
Oh, the separation. Okay.
Separation resulted, yeah.
Oh, okay, got you. Yeah, I think he talk about. I think you notice the mind start put in the capital. Okay, so I think the McGill try to put the capital in the mind.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, that's not the general mind. That's a bigger mind. So,
No, he's talking about the cosmic mind.
yeah, cosmic mind. Okay,
Yeah.
and then so I think it's the same thing. I think that the all ancient philosophy need to talk about heaven and earth, just like in Bible, the God create. Then I think the have the light on the first day. Then they have the heaven, right? They created the heaven and earth, same as here. Anaxagoras has the mind to create heaven and earth from homogeneous, same as Chinese philosopher. Okay, when they talk about primal chaos, then next thing is the Tao will make the heaven and the earth. So I think they just have picked some place to stop.
I'm going to, okay, well, your idea may be right, and I respect your view, but I'm going to disagree because I like the notion that it was simply a mechanical explanation for how motion occurred. It's like I explained before. If you begin with a motionless universe, where does motion come from? Anaxagoras looked at the fact that he could raise his hand up in the air and saw that mind can cause things to move even without touching. And so he speculated that the origin of all motion in the universe was this mind. Now, everything that I've read is that the emphasis was just on this initial motion, and that mind hasn't intervened since then. There's no notion of a mind that's intervening. It was just the cause of the initial motion, like the Big Bang. And this was his way of explaining the way motion and force came into the universe in the first place. And it's that fact that it was a simple mechanical explanation of motion that frustrated Aristotle so much. Aristotle objected and said, why doesn't he use mind to explain, these other things that were more that concerned Aristotle, such as purpose? And he says he just used it as a mechanical way because he couldn't explain where motion came from, so he just kind of brought it in. So that's quite different than your notion that he's talking about mind as being kind of heaven or kind of an early
No. I
God or
didn't say
something.
mind.
No, it's just a force, like the
Well, I
Big
think
Bang.
I told well, okay, probably you I don't okay, the heaven here I mean the sky. Okay, let's put this way.
Well, sky or whatever, you know.
Yeah, but the sky has no force. Okay, basics. When I
Well,
talking about
what's going on in the sky is, and they mentioned this in the McGill, and it's also was true of Anaximander, that when you look up in the sky, you see the motion of the stars, and you need to explain that somehow. Where did that motion come from? And so all of the early great scientists in Ionia are trying to explain, how did this motion get started?
okay,
Where
I
did the
got your
motion of the
point.
stars occur from?
Anaxagoras is talking about the mind make the star moving, right?
Yes, that's what
Okay,
he's talking
and
about, the
Aris,
stars.
okay, I got your point. So Aristotle will see let's have a first mover to move it, and the rest just mechanism. It just have to work this way. Is that what you meant?
That was Anaxagoras, but Aristotle came in and he said, no, we need something more than just a mechanical beginning. That did not take full
Oh,
advantage of
so
the
that's
nous.
why Aristotle bring the teleology concept
He
here.
brings the teleology in, exactly. He says,
Okay,
where did purpose come from? Well, the nous, because see, that's one thing that Anaxagoras never.
okay. So let me make it clear on
How
this.
do acorns turn into oak trees? Aristotle
So
had a much larger design, much
okay,
more
got your point.
ambitious.
So based both on Anaxagoras and Aristotle talk about nous, but their
Yes,
nous are different. Okay, and
yeah.
Anaxagoras
Aristotle's
nous
it has more involvement in the
teleological.
universe.
Okay, teleological moves. So the mind thinking about the purpose of the movie, and then for Anaxagoras, the mind is just like magic power. I say
Yeah,
bend the spoon.
magical power, exactly.
Yeah,
It just
just
call
like
it's like it's
the
equivalent to the Big
magician say
Bang.
like bend the stick, then it just bend it. That's an
Well,
Anaxagoras. Okay.
sure,
Yeah.
that is the power of the mind. Look
Yeah,
what it
and
does with our hands.
Aristotle, the mind is talking about write, and the pen start to write. I think that's a
Exactly,
okay. Okay, I got
exactly.
that. Okay, got you. That's a good way to differentiate. Okay. Uh,
It is. Yeah.
uh, which one we should talk about? The
Okay, the
process?
process.
Yeah.
The process described is only a local one. Anaxagoras reasoned that mind must set things in order in other parts of the boundless universe, producing other worlds. We must suppose that men have formed in them and the other animals that have life, and that these men have inhabited cities and cultivated fields as with us, and that they have a sun and a moon and the rest as with us, and that their earth brings forth for them many things of all kinds, of which they gather the best together into their dwellings and use them. Thus much have I said with regard to separating off, to show that it will not be only with us that things are separated off, but elsewhere too.
So I think same thing, right? You're talking about not only the mind is more well, let's put it this way. They have some teleological sense here, because the mind is set things in order. That's the concept of teleology.
Yes, but the secondary sources point out that things were set into order, but not with any purpose.
Wow. The order itself is a purpose.
No,
Okay, so
it
how
could
are you
just
going
be a
to
random order
random?
without
No,
any larger purpose. In other words,
you
everything
don't
was
have
set
purpose.
in order by the mind.
Well, I
but
think
it
so.
was not done for any reason of design, of longer design. There was no
Okay.
design.
Okay. So if I agree with you, I will
I'm
say
getting that from, I learned that from a lot of the secondary sources.
I will agree with you on that because Aristotle will have a bigger. And if I when I accept this, I will say Anaxagoras is more advanced than Aristotle because
Exactly. That
okay.
is why you need to you need to understand what Anaxagoras is doing. Because if you say that he's designing and it's supernatural, it's kind of reminds us of the supernatural, then we don't give Anaxagoras as much
Okay.
credit.
So I got your point. We should read more on Anaxagoras than Aristotle. He's more scientific than Aristotle, but unfortunately, he only have a fragment left. So not
Yeah,
much to read.
unfortunately.
So make sure we write a lot for the future generation.
That's true. That's very true.
That's
But
very important.
I think that people, there are some ideas that Anaxagoras has which don't make a lot of sense.
We will see which part.
Well, like the one that everything is everything and that there are no substances, only qualities, and that
Oh,
qualities are
okay.
real and everything.
Yeah, yeah,
His
yeah, yeah.
cosmology is wonderful, but his chemistry and his theory of metaphysics leaves a lot to be desired. Okay. Um, Anaxagoras followed Anaximenes in holding that the earth is a flat disk held up by the air. The sun, he said, is bigger than the Peloponnesus. He correctly explained winds as due to the thinning of the air by the sun. Earthquakes are caused by the air above striking on the air under the earth. The movement of the latter causes the earth, floating on it, to rock. He understood the causes of eclipses, but thought that some lunar eclipses are caused by the interposition of invisible bodies between the sun and moon. This theory was evidently intended to explain the eclipses that occur when the sun is still above the horizon.
Well, not a bad assumption for the
Yeah,
invisible.
he has some very interesting speculative ideas, doesn't he?
Yeah, I have no comment on this. I think that's a good
I
way
just
to.
want to say about earthquakes that uh, Anaximenes earlier had a similar idea that the earthquake was due to the rocking of the air that holds the earth up. The air holds the earth up. Remember that Anaximenes, um, as opposed to Thales and Anaximander, believed that everything was made out of air. So he explains everything in terms of air. And
Okay.
he said that the reason that the Earth is able to stay in its place is that it's on a foundation of air. That was Anaximenes. And Anaximander um, had the bold proposal that the reason that the Earth is able to stay where it is that it's right in the middle of the universe, so it doesn't have anywhere to fall.
Mhm.
So a lot of these ideas about earthquakes and air and things like that came from Anaximenes, which is why a lot of people say that Anaxagoras was a student of Anaximenes, that he was a student in the sense that he was followed in the same school as Anaximenes. Now,
Mhm.
these days, we view Anaximenes as far more primitive and far less accurate than Anaximander. So, unfortunately, Anaxagoras followed the wrong guy as a mentor. He followed
He
the
will follow
basic idea of
Anaximander.
Anaximenes, so he chose wrong. This is just another example of what I was saying before, that people will come up with these ideas, but that doesn't mean that other people accepted them. And
Mhm.
people weren't going to accept Anaximander's view that the earth is suspended in pure space easily. So
Okay.
I just wanted to bring that up because there is some scholarship that's done on the fact of who did Anaxagoras follow most. And he appears to be, this is an example of how he seems to be a follower of Anaximenes more than the others.
Okay.
Okay. Contrary to the theory of Empedocles, according to which perception is a process of uniting constituents of the sense organs with like things outside them, Anaxagoras held that perception is essentially an irritation by substances unlike those that compose the organs. He worked his theory out with considerable subtlety. We see light because the pupils of our eyes are dark. This explains also why we cannot see at night. We perceive warmth and cold only when in contrast, our skin is colder or warmer than the object felt. When they are at the same temperature, there is no sensation. Salt, sweet, and sour tastes are known because, though these qualities are in us, there is a deficiency which makes possible a contrast. It follows that all perception is subliminal pain, as is proved by the fact that any prolonged or violent sensation is felt as painful.
Yeah, I think that's just 1 minute. Yeah, he different than Empedocles, right? We will read the next week. So I think that's a two different concept. I think the Empedocles basics putting for uniting, the process of uniting, and Anaxagoras because of irritation. So I think Anaxagoras is more take the view as a relativism point of view, and then Empedocles is more on the absolute point of view in general for their philosophy that I'm thinking,
And you think the theory of sensation
Yeah.
backs up the notion of relativism over absolutism?
Yeah, I think that's the on the epistemology point of view.
Yeah, okay.
More on the different way. Either one is correct or is reasonable. And so we we can say we taste sweet because we have a sweetness on our tongue. So when we hit the sugar, we feel sweet. Or you can say we have a bitterness on our tongue. So when we touch something sweet, we feel, or less bitter. Okay, we feel sweet. So I I think it's either way, the different way to it. So one take the relative point of view, one take absolute point of view, so
Well, that's a great observation. I really like it. Yeah,
yeah.
I love the notion
And
of
you can see
bringing
their
in.
location also makes difference, right? Empedocles is on the Italian side, okay, on the Sicily, okay, and Anaxagoras is on the Ionian side. So that side, I mean, Italian, more religious, okay, and then more on this side. So you do see the different. Even the both Empedocles and Anaxagoras are great scientists. Okay, during this almost the same time. Yeah, I think some philosopher or some because I'm also read the Gusari's history of Greek philosophy. He put in Empedocles before Anaxagoras. Okay, that's the order he put.
Well, it's actually unfortunate that McGill doesn't do that because it would make a lot of sense to have Empedocles before
You also
looking
think
at
that make more
Anaxagoras.
sense? You also think that make more sense for Empedocles? They
Yeah.
probably don't know each other. They probably don't interact each other. Okay, but why you think Empedocles should go before Anaxagoras?
Because actually, I can't remember the reason, but as I was reading Anaxagoras, I kept thinking that Empedocles belonged before Anaxagoras.
Okay, so probably most of philosopher or the textbook will put Empedocles before Anaxagoras.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll
I
tell you
think.
why.
Why? Go ahead.
Another reason, this isn't a very strong reason, but Empedocles is in southern Italy and Anaxagoras begins the Athenian tradition. So Anaxagoras moves to Athens and the
Oh,
Athens
okay,
begins then. So we have a whole new geographic region that's going to be started by Anaxagoras.
okay, gotcha.
Whereas we've already been studying, as you pointed out, the other religious philosophers in southern Italy, Parmenides, Protagoras.
Yeah, yeah, you are right. Yeah.
I can't remember all the other reasons, but I do think it's more logical. Could you spell the name of the author of the book that you keep mentioning?
Okay, Guthrie, Guthrie.
Oh, everybody talks about him. I need to get
Who?
that
What do you
book.
mean, everybody?
All the secondary sources I read
Yeah, because
talked about Guthrie.
I find out that it is the most comprehensive book about pre-Socratic philosophy, because they also include the original fragment. Okay, also include all other people talking about them, because and they organize, and it's
Yeah,
crazy.
like Diogenes and
Yeah, yeah, there's
Simplicius,
yeah,
long
yeah.
excerpts.
Yeah, there's all these people, and that's no way to read them. And then they have the 6 volume on that. Well, of course, they
Did you
include
buy all 6 volumes? How many volumes?
they all include this was also include Plato and Aristotle. Okay, so there's a 6 volume on that. Okay, I eventually I collect. I will say collect 6 volume on that. Not
So you have all 6 volumes
I have
now, or
all
you
six
read?
volumes. It's in PDF. If you want, I can
And
send.
how late? Oh, I see. And so it's in PDF. Okay.
It's in PDF.
So and how far does it extend to what time period?
It extend to the I think so to the Aristotle is the end. I
Oh,
can.
so it's 6 volumes and it only goes to Aristotle.
You only go to Aristotle, not go to
Oh,
today's
okay.
Greek.
Yeah, I can
Okay.
see. Yeah, that
Okay.
would
So
be
let me
very
see.
authoritative.
Yes, the last chapter. Okay, is let me see. The volume 6 is Aristotle. I think the volume 6 is only dedicated philosopher, human life, political psychology. Yeah, that's all Aristotle. Okay, that's it. Probably talk about the school. The how do you call the pet? What's the name of the school? Aristotle's school?
The Peripatetics or the
Peripatetic school. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Lyceum.
Yeah, he talked about it, but not much. Okay, so basically it's end over there. So not go to Roman or whatever. So it's a very comprehensive book, and then it's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah, that
about
sounds good. I'm glad you're reading that, and I'm
yeah,
glad you refer to that. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Okay,
Well,
shall I continue?
yeah, you should not say I'm reading it. That would be too much
Yeah,
because
I understand,
yeah,
but you can, you could use it as a reference.
Yeah, it's as a
You have
record.
some good insights from it.
Yeah, very good insight. Very good.
Okay,
That's what I mean.
as to an estimate of Anaxagoras, he was aware of the Italian philosophers, the Pythagoreans, Parmenides, Empedocles, and Zeno, and in some respects adopted their views concerning eclipses. In others, made concessions to their arguments in rejecting a vacuum, and sometimes argued against them. His doctrine of infinite divisibility seems to stem from an attempt to refute Zeno. Primarily, however, Anaxagoras was the continuator of the Milesian school. His conception of the beginning and of the process of world formation, for instance, was an elaboration of Anaximander's. And like the Milesians, he was a thorough rationalist. There is no trace of mysticism in his work. And if he had any emotional reaction to his vision of the nature of things, no report of it has come down to us. The Milesians still talked of God and the divine in connection with the cosmic process, albeit these terms had become mere abstract labels for stuffs and mechanisms. In Anaxagoras, on the other hand, even the words have disappeared, nor was his mind an object of worship. It was not a personality, and as Socrates complained, it was not even a cosmic designer. It was just the projection of human cognition and will, known in experience as initiator of motion, without any moral or religious attributes. And it's interesting, I think, that we talked about this topic over the last few minutes.
Yes.
Here it makes here he reinforces the idea that we were discussing. Which is that his notion of nous was merely mechanical and just refers to this initial action.
Yeah. Do you know where Socrates refute complaint about Anaxagoras?
No, I don't.
I just try to find out, but
I think maybe in the Phaedo.
I think
The Phaedo.
I
The reason
searched.
I say that isn't because I remember it distinctly, but just something in my mind tells me the Phaedo. So in any case, I'm not sure about that at all.
Okay, so you kind of have the vague memory.
I have a vague memory because I was just reading about this,
I
today.
think I searched with Fido, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, I think I searched. I'm very curious to know because I kind of proud of I read a lot of Plato's dialogue. So it would be embarrassed if I don't know where he comes. So
Yeah, you have a good memory for the dialogues, that's for sure.
no, I don't have a good memory. I just put a lot of effort to read.
Yeah, you've done a
And
lot
I
of,
can,
you've
and
read a
right
lot of
now
the
I
dialogues.
all read in the digital form, so I should have no problem to search. But I don't find it, uh,
Well, the real emphasis in the secondary sources I read is in the rather longer excerpts that I read from Aristotle, where he complains, because
you mean Aristotle complained?
Aristotle complains that Anaxagoras doesn't do enough with nous. He needed to do
Okay,
more with nous.
yeah, I will not surprise that. Yeah.
Now, I have a kind of an explanation for why Plato and Aristotle were perturbed. Because instead of discussing a single mind, they evolved philosophy so that it became, their metaphysics became a multiplicity of forms. And when you have a multiplicity of forms, then you need to describe them in more than simply a mechanical way. They couldn't discuss, they weren't discussing the universe's motion so much as they were discussing where all these forms came from and how they developed their final purpose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Okay. In one respect, Anaxagoras' explanation of things was more consistent than that of any other predecessors, having postulated that nothing can come from nothing and that things are what they seem to be. That is, the sensible qualities are literally the constituents of the things. He had no difficulty, as Empedocles did, in accounting for the diversity of objects of experience. But at the same time, this success was a great failure. For if there are as many principles of explanation as there are things to be explained, how can one be said to explain anything? Everything comes from just what it is. But to say that visible concentrated hair comes from obscured diluted hair is not to satisfy the demand that impels us to ask for explanations. Granted that we do not want to be told that hair comes from nothing, we still look for some sense in which the hair comes from what is not hair.
Hair comes from what? So just question on the top of the page talking about this success was a great failure. What does it mean?
He means that
You know which part I'm talking
that
about?
although he resolved the contradiction that had been pointed out by Parmenides and was successful in that way, that the very fact that he explained away this logical contradiction by proposing something that was completely,
Nonsense?
well, I would say it was, it didn't satisfy people because it basically just said that the ultimate source of all the diversity in the world is to have just ultimate diversity. Says, how do we get all the different things in the world?
Oh, so that means that in this world they have the infinite number of seeds.
Infinity of a variety.
They
That
have
was his success, but it was
yeah
also his
yeah.
failure.
For this cup they have the seeds for cup, or they have,
Exactly.
and even my nose have my nose and my eye.
Exactly.
And then Jason's eye, how can I have a Jason's eye and Jim's eye different or something?
Right. But you
Yeah.
see, you could see that this is successful because he refuted the paradox. He refuted the contradiction that Parmenides had seen by saying that everything is everything. But his success was a big failure.
Okay, because you bring another problem. So
You bring another problem. Yeah. Thus, the philosophy of Anaxagoras, in being the logical conclusion of the assumption that things are what they seem to be, was, like many logical conclusions, also a cul-de-sac. Like Parmenides' similar working out of the implications of monism, it closed off one way of investigation, and in doing so assured that the next advance in Greek thought made by the atomists would consist in denying the premise on which it rested.
I have no comment on this one.
Well, I'll just say that we're not doing Democritus next time, we're doing Empedocles.
And after Empedocles, we do Democritus,
Right,
Democritus, right?
yeah. So
Okay.
the thing that they pointed out in the McGill, that if you begin with four substances, you do kind of resolve part of the problem, but not completely. Because how can only four substances create all the distinctions in the world? That's a little bit hard to believe also. Yes, you could say mixtures cause new substances, but there's only so many mixtures you can have. So that's the problem with Empedocles that, of course, we wouldn't have with Democritus, because Democritus believed that there was an infinite variety of atoms. That's Democritus's solution. Okay.
Last period.
Anaxagoras was the first to bring philosophy to Athens. He was also the first philosopher to suffer from Athenian religious and political bigotry. Tried and convicted of impiety for his statements about the sun and moon and allegiance to a foreign power, Persia, he was, it seems, condemned to death, but escaped to Lampsacus in Ionia, where he spent the rest of his days as an honored school teacher.
Okay, so
there's a couple of interesting things about this last paragraph. The first is the irony that Athens is famous for its free thought, and yet they killed Socrates, drove Aristotle away. He wasn't able to live there, he was threatened with death, and they drove Anaxagoras away, and he had to resettle in Ionia. The second interesting thing about him resettling in Lampsacus, which is over in Ionia, is the fact that when he went there, they weren't bothered by the fact that he said that the sun was a big rock. And he was an honored intellectual there. And I get the feeling that in many ways, Ionia and perhaps southern Italy as well were more tolerant of diverse heresy than the Athenians were, because these people seem to have no real problem in these other regions.
I agree with you, but that's a dilemma in this whole human history, right? If unit has a powerful state, because during that time, Athens is on its rise, okay, become a powerful, okay, state, okay. So you need to have a sort of control, okay. So that's why Ionian will lose or being occupied by Persian, okay. So same thing if China become much more powerful because they are tight control. America is losing their way because we have more and more freedom. So that's always a dilemma. Okay, so you want to have a powerful state, there's no way you can have a total freedom. Okay, so which one is more important? I choose the latter. Okay, not the former. So that's the way we need
That's
to
very interesting, and that explains it for the first time.
that's always like this. You see that's a powerful culture or something like they all supported by the powerful state, and then that's become a cycle. Okay, you have a freedom, you develop the powerful, colorful thing, then you start to lose your your power. Okay, during the competition, and then the other one do it, then they become great. And I think that's the situation. We cannot change it.
Very interesting.
We just can hope during our limited life. Okay, we are living in the period of time you prefer. So
That's very interesting.
I don't mind. I can become the third world country. Okay, after I die. Okay, well, I'm not saying not right after I die. My death, because my son still live. Let's say 50 years after my death. Okay, I don't mind. Okay, but
Okay.
I just want to make sure we have a freedom during my life and during my son's life. So okay, so
Hey, very nice. It was very enjoyable.
okay, that's finished today.